Hello, it's Stardate October 2020, and the latest issue of Society of Light and Lighting's Light Lines dropped through the letterbox, and there inside I came across this, the Ambient Lighting Manifesto by four of the great and good guys, and they really are great and they really are good. I was a little bit concerned about the content of what's being proposed, because apparently we've been doing it all wrong forever. So I thought, this can't be right. Must have a chat. So I contacted my good friend Andy Bissell and my other good friend Ian Macrae, because everybody needs two good friends, to find out what their opinion was. And this is what happened.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bissell. I head up the lighting design group for Cundall.
Hi, I'm Ian Macrae. I'm an independent consultant, and I also train on behalf of the LIA and the University of South Wales.
And I'm John Bullock, and I'm a lighting designer, and I'm also the publisher and editor of the Light Review.
And I've been doing some research, looking at lighting research and technology to see where Kit's got to on this ambient illuminance, because he did the thing on mean room surface excitance years ago, and I didn't pull him to pieces. I just said, yeah, it's a great bit of research, it's a great idea, but how on earth do you measure it? I mean, any metric has to have a measure, because the illuminance meter is, I've got one on the desk. Look, isn't it wonderful? You can pick this thing up and you can point it at something, you can measure it, and you can say whether it works or not. So I went back to him and said, do that. I'll be happy if you do that. And I was reading his article just thinking, has he come up with a metric? Has he? And it's the same old stuff, except technology has now moved. Andrew, I don't know whether you're using HDR imaging and high pixel count imaging to measure stuff, but you can buy a camera and a lens for less than £1,000 and do HDR imaging and get luminance data back. And we're kind of there technology wise.
Yeah, we're doing a little bit of it for dark skies. I mean, you can calibrate your particular sensor, and you can then start looking at the sky dome that is created by an adjacent city, and you can start taking readings and angles for that, providing that you have the correct lens and you can measure from it. So we are doing some of that, but it's still £1,000 of cameras compared to a light meter that somebody, if they wanted, could get for...
A light meter 600 to, I don't know what the Minolta one is now with all its fancy heads. £1,000, £1,200. Yeah. The issue is Amazon are selling them for £45.
That's it.
To people who don't really know any better.
Yeah. Or you can go and hire one. You can go and hire one for £30.
Yeah.
But everything that you're talking about is sort of, it's real world stuff. It's actually measuring things that are there.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with Kit's work. I mean, we always have this argument in lighting design, don't we, between John and Ian, because John is a lighting designer and Ian was, in his day, a commercial lighting engineer, designer, if you really want to pick names. But John, you go out and balance scenes in someone's house to make it look beautiful and also to make it work for them, which is very easy because you've got an end client and they're very specific. I go out, or I did, and I create wall-to-wall illuminance for a working plane for a client who doesn't know any better and hasn't fitted out the space. And Andy, you probably come somewhere in between, where you've got clients who don't just want beautification, but they want working practical spaces, but they know what they're going to put in there. They're professional clients who have bought the space and want design. And there's always been this, well, are you a theatre designer? Are you a Nolte? Are you an Intu? Or are you a Thorn, Zumtobel, Phillips? And there's been this difference. But I think this takes it further, because there's this third group that we keep forgetting, who are the researchers, who make money out of publishing papers and teaching people. And they come up with these great ideas. Kit's done it before. Kit's been doing it since the year dot, really. And before him, it was others. And they make money out of coming up with these great ideas, which we then have to apply. And at the extreme end, I have to apply with clients who don't understand. I mean, they don't understand illuminance on a working plane. God forbid anything like MRSE or task ambient. I'm teaching at the moment, John, we had this conversation. I'm teaching at the moment the designed appearance method, which is about contrast ratios applied to illuminance. Really, it's luminance, but to balance the space. And most commercial lighting designers can't get their head around that the space has to be designed, instead of going, oh, hang on, I've got this book here, and this book on page whatever says 500 lux on an imaginary task.
Is that this book, Ian?
No, it's the partner that goes with that one. That one's slightly better, actually.
You two need to get a room, and then you've got the full set.
Well, I've got this one as well. Do you want this one? Where is he? Where is he?
Look at that.
Christopher Cundall. And he does the design appearance method. And actually, if you read his research, all this MRSE, designed illumination, it all comes back to balancing the space.
Yeah. Now, the reason that I'm keen on hearing what Andy's got to say is that I know that the work that Andy's been doing is award-winning commercial office lighting design, which certainly does not come anywhere near what's being described in that lighting manifesto. And Andy, can you explain to us where you sit in? I mean, okay, Ian's just put me and himself at sort of. I think the spectrum's like that big, but we're probably.
Yeah, we're not that far apart.
We're not that far apart.
Yeah.
And really, our difference is probably that I'm dealing with somebody who's moving into their dream home.
Yeah.
And Ian's doing serious work.
Well, no, John, you're getting paid. It must be serious.
So Andy, from your point of view, we're talking about localized lighting and what a revolution that was. But how does what these guys are saying fit into what you are doing?
Yeah, I think what you've picked up on there before, we describe it internally as the difference between lighting engineering and lighting design. So the lighting design, you're listening to the client's brief, you're interpreting that brief, you're listening to the architect, you're looking at what they're producing, and then you are responding to that. And you are responding to that with your knowledge as a designer. On the other hand, the lighting engineer is listening to the brief and they are saying, what is the minimum I have to do? And they are going away and calculating that minimum based on guides and standards. And rarely will they step away from the standards, because that's what they're paid to do. They are paid to make sure that that space meets the standards, and that's what they do. We're paid for our design knowledge and our experience, and the fact that we will step away from the current standards where we feel it's appropriate and right to do so. And it's one of the first things I'd pick up. The article in the latest SLL where they talk about the ambient method. And I think there was one statement in there said something along the lines of the lighting designer won't step away from standards for fear of litigation. Well, yes, you will step away from them, because it's just a recommendation. And my argument is you need 1 lux to get out of a building that's lost its power supply. So if I give someone 5 lux, I've given them far more lighting than they actually need to escape the building. Therefore, there is no danger. Now, if I've put 1,000 lux on a wall next to that 5 lux, there's an issue. That's an issue. That's because you've got this brightness, you've got this contrast that the eye can't cope with. But that's my experience, and that's my knowledge, and that's the team's knowledge, and every lighting designer's knowledge. So, and as you say, you two are not lighting engineer, lighting designer, and I think there is that grey area where you start to get people who are sitting in both camps, or can sit in both camps, if you like. And so from our perspective, the localized lighting is simply a response to the client's brief and the interior design. And it's our interpretation as lighting designers, how to make that work, our understanding of what the eye needs from a technical perspective and what the eye needs from a visual perspective. And that, for me, is lighting design. That's what we should all be capable of doing. We should all be capable of that. And the thing that strikes me with this ambient methodology, when you read through it, is it's trying to turn 10 years of experience into 9 acronyms and a spreadsheet. And that's basically what they're trying to do. And it's kind of like, well, okay, if that is possible, let's turn architecture into 9 acronyms and a spreadsheet. Let's turn electrical engineering into 9 acronyms and a spreadsheet. Well, it's not possible, is it? It's just not possible. So I think my first issue with the whole thing is it's trying to engineer design. And is that even possible? And also, should we even be trying to? Because if you turn everything that's design into a set of numbers on a spreadsheet, we're not going to end up with the same solution everywhere we go.
But Andrew, if you read far enough back, I mean, I'm interested in more on the localized, because if you go back to Kit's original, well, it's not even his original paper, but his paper back in about 2013 or something, he says we fundamentally got it wrong. And actually, I do agree with him there, because when we're teaching, why do we design to 500 lux? Why is there that magic number? It appears to come back to a very old graph that says, look, as you increase the illuminance level, your visual acuity goes up. And there comes a point economically where you make fewer mistakes. And about the 80% mark is 500 lux. And if you go to the Japanese for a long time had interior lighting at 750 lux because they didn't accept any mistakes, and that's kind of the magic 100% level. And then you reach this plateau, more light doesn't reduce the number of mistakes. So we came with this, read 12 point text in black on a white sheet of paper. Actually it was Landau rings, no one does that anymore, and that was 500 lux. Sadly, yeah. And Kit back in 2013 says that's just not the case. In fact, the reason I had it on my iPad, this little graph here says that a 25-year-old can read 12-point black text on a white sheet of paper at 20 lux. And the worst you need to read 6-point text is 120, 130 lux. So that questions this whole 500 lux thing. So the four of them are saying, how about we step back from the magic 500 lux and recognize that in the modern world with modern research, we say you can read a sheet of paper just in front of your face in as low as 20 lux. And that's actually my experience. I sit here under an angle poise at night and it's about 25 lux on the desk. And at 52, I can still read with poor eyesight. So drop the energy levels. Instead of in the guide saying 500 lux, bring it back to a much lower level. And then if you need more light, I think as you're saying with localized, if you need more light because you're older, your eyesight is poor, you're doing a particularly difficult task for a length of time, add some localized task lighting. Take the emphasis off what can be misinterpreted as 500 lux wall to wall to wall because you don't really know where the task is, and say, do that at a much lower level. Balance the brightness of the space and then add a task light when you need it.
And other people will ask questions. And when you get onto the lighting, everybody's got an opinion. They're not asking questions, they've got an opinion. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Blah, blah, blah. That to me is what we need to solve. Now, could this do that?
I'm not sure it could.
I'm not sure it could, because I think it actually dumbs down what we know. I think it turns it into 9 acronyms in a spreadsheet, and suddenly...
Well, no, I think you're wrong. John, forgive me for butting in, but there is one key thing that is in here that is part of the understanding of good design, and that is working in ratios between surfaces, understanding the flow and the balance of light. What it doesn't teach you is what is good. It just teaches you some numbers, 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, which we all know gives you some contrast, but that doesn't make you a designer, because you've got to have the experience of, if I put 3 times the amount of light here to back here, does it work? And the numbers are not going to teach you that. Experience is going to teach you that.
Yes. Yeah.
My concern, I think, was that because coming back to where this document sits within the professional lighting community, and therefore we are the ones who are being pointed at to say we need to change all the way that we're doing things, and we need to get onto this ambient LIDOS kind of protocol, which, as you say, nine acronyms, and so we're also so we've now got tables to look at, but we're not the problem. The problem is the 80% of the jobs that are not being done by us. But I
think it's probably even higher than that, John.
Oh, I think, well, I've always said, I always thought it's 5%. 5% of jobs were done by people who know what they're talking about. And maybe 5% get done by people who are lucky enough to get away with it, though they don't know what they're talking about. But here we've got a situation where you have one calculation that you can actually do in your head in terms of the looming method. You don't even need a calculator, let's face it, to do the looming method. And the 80–90% of people who are doing a version of that, it's now being proposed that we dump that so that we then introduce a system for people who don't need it because we're already using a version of it anyway. But are we suggesting that the 90% are going to use the LIDOS system?
Yeah.
That ain't never going to work.
Well, given that on software, so the software does not exist. I know Radiance has been coded to do some of this, but not every lighting designer is going to recode Radiance just to get the number. Andy, you would do it. Dialux, Relux, and all the others are not set up for this, even if they could. Most people who come on software training think it's lighting design training, and they stop at the point that the computer says 500 lux, this is the array you need. Mm-hmm. And until you take that functionality out of the software and replace it with something that could do MRSE or whatever, mm-hmm. It's lighting design is not going to change for those 80%. And that is not, I always say lighting software is not lighting design, it's calculation. It tells you what's going to happen. It doesn't tell you whether it's right.
We use the software to convince ourselves that we've gone in the right direction, but we've already done the design and we've already proposed our solution long before we touch a calculation. How do you know that the software has done it right? When you put one light in a room, you know before that calculation's finished what should happen. You know whether you're going to get 500 lux or not. All you don't know is whether it's 490 or 513 or 481. But you know that size of light, that many lumens over that desk. I know. If it comes out and says 10 lux, you'll go, that's an issue. I've put it above the ceiling. I've got the wrong data. I've turned it upside down. I've done something. Yeah. That person who's looking at the green light saying 500 lux, they've hit print, they've finished their job, they've signed their timesheet, they've gone, and that job's gone out the door. And so I'm not a big fan of software replacing knowledge, and unfortunately that's where we are, I think, in the industry at the moment. So for this technique, for this ambient lighting, LIDOs, etc., to become something you can do in a software package. So you sit in Revit and you go, that's my primary surface, that's a secondary, that's a tertiary. Oh, actually, but I do want this to stand out, and I want that to stand out. Go. And it designs your lighting for you.
But that would be possible, wouldn't it, Andy?
Yes, it's possible. But is it right, again? Because if you come back to this idea that do you trust everything that comes out of the software? Or do you still need that knowledge to question and say, this doesn't seem right to me? And we had that recently. We had some results come out and we're like, that just doesn't seem right. Why is it was a daylight calculation. Why is it brighter there? I don't understand why it's brighter there. So we stopped ourselves and we backtracked and we checked the model, we checked what we'd done, checked all the parameters, and we found we'd entered some data wrong. We'd got too high a reflectance in one area. And I think we had a layer name wrong, so that layer didn't copy through, little things, but we knew so much that we knew to say, this isn't right. But actually the results they weren't far off, but they were far enough that we picked it up. Most people would have hit print and sent that off. So,
but you also raise another problem, reflectance. So you're working in a space where you know what the interior designer is already going to do. And I assume you're having a conversation with them and you could say, look, actually around the window, could you change that color to something different? Because, But in most spaces, well, this is a good example, you get cream or white walls. And it's got nothing to do with lighting design. It's got to do with the cost of the paint and so on. And we're not designing. If you want a designed appearance on a room, you have to have control of things like the colors, or you have to know what the color scheme is going to be. And John, greatest respect, in a high-end home, they've probably had some idea how they're going to decorate. Probably. And in most end clients' spaces, they know something about how they're going to decorate. But in most spec office blocks, which is where this 80% of lighting goes, they have no idea.
Yep.
It's like the 80% maintenance factor. It's 70, 50, 20. It's not even 70, 50, 20, is it? Come on, it's 85, 87, 33 or something. If you want to do designed appearance, you're going to design with reflected light, which means you need to know the surfaces.
It's not in their interest for something to be complicated. Imagine if that, quarter of an hour, half hour calculation now suddenly becomes a spreadsheet and they've got to, can they still do that for nothing and be sure they're going to make money? And so it comes back to that question of, are we tackling the wrong problem here? Should we still just take another step back? I appreciate what they've done and taken a step back and they've said, let's not think about horizontal luminance, let's think about the space. But should we take another step back and just say, let's solve once and for all who should be doing this in the first place?
But they're doing that by saying, let's run these two systems side by side for a period of time. So let's have this new measure, ambient illuminance, and let's still keep the standards. And what we'll do is we'll design it twice. I can't afford to do that, I'm sorry. so what am I going to do? I'm going to have to design it for what my client wants, which is going to be the standards. But if you design both, and then eventually what you do is you say, in a couple of years' time, we're going to stop horizontal illuminance at 500 lux and we're going to go with ambient illuminance. And therefore, you're going to have to be professional. Hopefully, by that time, everyone has come on a course and had learned to be a lighting designer and practiced. Now, I'm in agreement. I don't think that will drive the change. But equally, Andy, I'm not sure that we have a way of enforcing professionals who understand what they're doing into the market. I mean, you've got to take a whole series of designers with you, most of whom will look at this and go, MRSE, task ambient ratio, what? They won't understand it. So they're going to have to go back to college to learn it. But we can't take basic horizontal luminance on the floor at a worst case emergency. We can't take those people with us.
No, I think sorry, go on, John.
I was just going to say, we've got another problem, haven't we? Just as not to forget this, that in order for this new world, a number of activities are needed, which involves research and development and research and a better understanding.
There was a well-known man
research.
There was a well-known man who remained nameless who spoke to me this morning about this and said, yeah, it's basically a reason to charge more for research. Yeah, there's at least another 10 years worth of research here. And who's going to do that research? Now, good luck to the people doing that research, because clearly research normally has some really great outcomes, but you have to question why, and who's going to make some money whilst it happens. I think there are massive, massive challenges with taking lighting designers who practice lighting application design at the moment to a level where they can understand this and change the standard, because you're going to have some standards, because people will want to sue. They want to stand up in a court of law. So you're going to have to change the measurement, and you're going to have to come up with new systems and practice them and prove them in a court of law. And that is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, this is not like the thing we've gone through with COVID, massive paradigm shift to wearing masks, and people can't even wear a mask properly. This is taking expertise beyond most people who understand light. How many people, Andy, do you really know who practice great lighting design, who could pick this up now and go, yes, I really understand what the hell it's talking about? And that's the same question to you, John. Would most people who are professionals really understand the ins and outs of practicing this?
I think that is really interesting, because I think when you talk about lighting professionals, it's a big bucket. Mm-hmm. And it's a very cloudy bucket, it's a bucket of fog. There's people who will dive in there and say, yep, I'm in that bucket. And I wouldn't let them near, their own light switch and light bulb at home, let alone near a client's light bulb and light switch. But there'll people who will throw themselves in there because they just feel, yeah, I want to do that. I like that. Well, liking something, I like doing my steel in my garden. It was interesting. It was different. I'm not going to turn myself into a structural engineer and start doing it. It was nice to do, And I think which professionals would pick this up and understand it. I think our initial problem is who's in that bucket. Which ones do we need to just politely say, I'm sorry, mate, but you're just going to have to get out of this bucket. It's just not your bucket, Go and find another bucket to jump into. And I think the interesting thing for me is the cost of doing this at the moment. Somebody sits down, let's say it's an electrical engineer, sits down and does a horizontal calculation in Dialux, uniformity. If you're lucky, they might think about the glare, probably not, but there you go. If you're lucky, they might think about the wall, but probably not. They take half an hour to do that at the moment, and they can do a layout of an office, and they can then throw that into Revit and send it out the door. If you've got to do this, that same room, if that took you half an hour in Dialux before, how long is this going to take you? Okay, what are my LIDOs? What's my PBI? Am I going down the PBI routes, or am I going down the PAI routes? And now I need my TAIR, and okay, so what's that going to do? My DVD, my DFD, yeah, what am I doing? Oh, my VE, that's going to take them a week. Now, fee level wise, from a client's are driving fees, consultants' fees all the time. Mm-hmm. And they're coming and saying, how much for the electrical engineering? Does that include lighting? Oh, yeah, we'll get a guy to do a calc. Now, oh, hang on, no, we need a separate fee on every job. Oh, I'll go to the manufacturer who does it for nothing. And the other worry I do have about numbers and metrics, and we've seen it, you know, Cat 2 office lighting all those years ago, it was the right way of thinking because there was a problem with screens. But who was it who came up with stick 1,000 of them in and you're all right? And for how many years?
But
20 years we stuck 1,000 of those fittings in, and actually the guides and the research didn't say, you know, create caves and you'll be all right. The guide didn't say that, but for 20 years we had that. 400 lux 0.7 uniformity. You know, it was in the BCO guide, and people still throw that back at you now, and it's not in the current guide, and it should never have been in there, but it's stuck. And 2% daylight factor. You know, I mean, if I heard someone say, oh, I've got 2% daylight factor, and then I started to hear people go, oh, I've got 1.9, so I'm kind of there. Well, I've got 1.8, and if I round that up, I'm kind of there. And, you know, and it's kind of like, there's always someone who's going to, when they see a metric, there's always someone who's going to abuse that. There's always someone who's going to try and find a way around it to make a buck. And so I think, whilst that new metric or series of metrics is obviously better than one or two, I think somebody would just get around that somehow and go, you need one of these, mate, you know?
Well, I mean, that is the answer, isn't it? You need one of these, which is you're going to put some ceiling lighting in. You're going to put some light onto the walls, and you're going to stick an angle poise or whatever on the desk, which happens to be dimmable, and say, look, now you've got a flexible environment. You can do what you like. And we know that the vast majority of people are going to walk into that office space. They can see the walls, there's some light onto the ceiling. If they can't read their piece of paper, they stick the task light on, they're going to be happy.
And also he talks about the fact the horizontal plane isn't the issue, but doesn't go on to talk about the face being the thing, because actually the face is now the thing. And we've had that for years.
I picked up on that. I can't find it quickly, but the idea that what you should be doing is lighting. I put it down because in my time at Thorn we had this thing called task space face. And if you light all three properly as part of your design process, you balance space. But I absolutely agree. I think he's talking about revealing all objects. I do worry that it's very easy for me to sit here and plan what I see, but I don't sit here. It's like road lighting. We do not drive a car at 1.2 meters above the road looking 2 degrees down in the center of the lane. It just doesn't happen, but the standards say it does. In an office, you do not have a fixed point of view. Your eyes constantly move. You move. So whatever metric has to work for the human being, with saccades, the eye constantly moving, the head constantly moving, and that's a very complex thing to think about.
I had a concern in the Leidos article about the example he uses is a hotel reception area, hotel lobby. Now, the thing about offices is that we tend to be nailed there. You're sitting on a chair, you're sitting at a desk, you know where everything is, and you can work it. A hotel lobby is empty. It's just an empty space for people to walk through. The important thing about a hotel lobby is the human-to-human interaction stood in the middle of the space. But how sophisticated does that calculation method have to be when you've taken wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall floor 4, the reception desk, but in the middle of the room around the pot plants, nothing.
And
so
you have heads that move. Yeah, but you have heads that move constantly. And how do you tell a computer program to work out whatever metric it is, cylindrical, aluminum or something, onto a head when the head has infinite positions and points of view?
And here's the interesting thing. If you were to say that's what you've just said, John, to a lighting consultant, they'll think about it and they'll weigh up what's actually happening in that hotel lobby, which is, am I getting value for money? You know, this is costing a lot or it's not costing a lot. Does the ambience reflect what I'm paying while I'm in here? Am I getting the experience I'm paying for? And by the way, as I casually chat to someone, because I'm not going to be holding an important meeting in the lobby, I'm going to be holding a casual chat. Can I see them sufficiently to do that? Give that to somebody who's thrown themselves into this lighting designer bucket when they should have thrown themselves in another bucket. Give that problem to someone, they'll want a metric, and then they will absolutely hit that metric, and they could well potentially destroy that hotel lobby. And I think that's the problem, that we're making the metric more complex, but then giving it to people who aren't. And I think that's where we're going to come across these problems. Another interesting one I read when I was reading through the Lido originally, it had all these processes and you follow this flow chart, blah, blah, blah. And then it said, you might have to just do a bit of trial and error with the ceiling lighting. Okay, so it's not really a metric then, it's back to design then. Okay,
well,
fine.
It's back to experience.
And I think right at the bottom it then said, and this assumes the correct illumination engineering principles are applied when trying to light the task. All right, so you need someone who knows what they're doing to light the task. Okay, so it's not actually robust enough to always work. Is it better than what we've got? Probably, but lighting
which is also
do it
not
better
robust
anyway.
enough to always work.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it is that feel that you could go through all those numbers. All you're doing is making one number bigger and another number smaller. At that point, you have no sense of how you're lighting that space.
I would
say
say
coming from or what it looks like.
I would say when you said, "Oh, there's all these bits of research that have got to be done." I mean, the problem with category 2 was that when we did the research, it seemed, let's solve a problem, and you make another problem. And the risk here is you make another set of metrics here that appear, the argumentation appears to stack up, but you need professionals. And then you give them a set of metrics that can still be misapplied and create bad spaces. And then we go, oh, well, that metric wasn't quite right. Let's move on to the next metric.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah. Again. Instead of saying, employ people who have trained and then worked and got experienced, and the boss has said to them, actually, don't just look it on the computer. You're going down to site now to see it finished, and we want you to critique it and say what did and what didn't work about this, and come back and say what you would do differently next time. And then, for goodness sake, go out and do it slightly differently next time. The metric is not vital. The understanding is.
And the interesting thing there is the lighting consultant has gone through that process. That's why they've become the professional they are. I think John's lunch is ready. What are you having for lunch, John?
I don't know. What are we having for lunch? Do you want to come and say hello to Andy and Ian?
I don't know what we're having for lunch. That's what I was saying.
This is Annabelle.
What were you
Hi, Annabelle.
Yeah, we're recording all of this. You're going to be live on the light review.
We are live now. Yeah.
Hello,
and we're having pumpkin soup if you want to come round. It's delicious.
Ah, sounds great.
How far away are you?
I don't know where you live, actually. I'm in Bicester.
Well, we're only in Dorset. And Andy's on the outskirts of Manchester, so between us, we could probably meet in Loughborough or somewhere.
My mum's in Loughborough. There you go.
Perfect.
Well, hers.
Loughborough.